If you believe in the code of experience, you should get tortured at least once in your life. That's dark prison humor, but you really begin to think that way. Part of my time as a naval officer for 28 years was as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam. Was shot down and spent the next 7 years and 9 days there. The solitary confinement gave me the opportunity to go back into my life to the very earliest memory I could possibly recall and relive my entire life in detail. Begin to understand yourself and who you are, why you are the way you are. And the real turning point came when my prayers finally changed from why me, God, to show me, God. Show me what I'm supposed to do with this. What are you preparing me for? Help me to use it to go home whenever that might be as a better, stronger, smarter person in every possible way that I can be. The communication system we used by tapping on the walls allowed us to be strong. In fact, our little 3-word motto was unity over self. And when the man in the cell next to you was down and hurting, you'd get up to your wall frequently and you tap to him, which is GB, and that means God bless. He knew that also meant, be tough, babe, hang in there. I love you, I'm praying for you. Now, Admiral Jeremiah Dent, also a U.S. Senator retired, had the presence of mind to flash with his eyes the word torture when he was being interviewed by an anti-war activist group. He was using Morse code because in blinking your eyes, you can close your eyes and hold them longer or just a little blink. So he would spell out Torture by blinking his eyes. An amazing feat. And he's answering questions at the same time. I always look at things with the glass half full rather than half empty. It's an ability to appreciate every moment, whether it's the good part of life or the painful part of life. It's all part and parcel of our life, and we need to embrace it and understand that if we're going to be a whole person, we have to experience that.
Greater Good Radio. Connect, learn, heal, and grow. This Greater Good archive video is brought to you by Brain Gain Hawaii, a boutique executive recruiting, career development, and coaching firm. Learn more at braingainhi.com.
Welcome to Greater Good Radio Hawaii, where we develop tomorrow's leaders by bringing you up close and personal with today's top business people. Greater Good Radio Hawaii is dedicated to social entrepreneurship. I'm your host, Evan Leong, and with me is my co-host, Kari Leong.
Thank you, Evan. Today's guest is retired Navy Captain Jerry Coffey, a keynote speaker, author, and media commentator. Captain Coffey was held captive as a POW for 7 years, which has inspired him to share his story to thousands of people a year across corporate America and international groups as well. Please welcome to Greater Good Radio, Captain Jerry Coffey. Welcome
Hello.
to our show.
Hey, Kari. Hello there. Thank you very much for having me.
So could you tell us what you're currently doing?
I have a lot of irons in the fire, but currently, from a professional standpoint, I'm still speaking on a full-time basis, even though I'm involved in other things, which kind of take away from that a little bit. But I'll be speaking about 24, 25 times this year professionally, and that doesn't count the things that I do in the community for military groups and churches and schools and civic groups, that kind of thing as well. So staying really busy and traveling quite a bit, but looking forward to staying home more.
So is your travel related to the business? With your speaking, or do you have something else that you're, I guess?
Well, we have family all over the country, actually, but most of the travel relates to our business because I speak literally all over the mainland and in some foreign countries as well. So that gives Susan and me a chance to kind of coattail some of our business trips with family visits as well.
Could you tell us a little bit about your business?
Sure. It's one of the things it's something that I never in my wildest dreams thought that I'd be doing. I mean, nobody goes to college. Well, some people do now, but in my day, nobody went to college to be a professional speaker. There was no kind of a degree or any kind of training for that necessarily. It's a very strange, unusual profession, actually. I ride on an airplane and, the person next to you will be saying, well, what do you do? I said, well, I'm a professional speaker. They might as well say, well, you don't look like a professional speaker. Well, I'm not speaking today, that's why.
Do they ask you to give them a portion of your speech because you're a comedian?
I always wait for the next question, and it usually is something like, well, what makes you a professional speaker? What do you speak about? And I say, well, I'm usually billed as an inspirational or motivational speaker. And they say, And then I know they're thinking about it. I said, well, what do you speak about your experiences, or did you write books, or what do you do? And then it ultimately comes up, well, part of my time as a naval officer for 28 years was as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam. I was a Navy pilot and was shot down over the country of North Vietnam, captured, and spent the next 7 years and 9 days there. And I feel that having survived the experience, as most of my friends did there, and that group, survival wasn't anything extraordinary, but going beyond survival was where the real mission was. And by that I mean, being able to not only survive the experience, but to return with honor. And that became our mission, our goal. But having survived the experience, I came home and felt a very strong responsibility to capitalize on the credibility that accrued from that experience, from that survival. And the vehicle for capitalizing on it became professional speaking, spreading that message. And basically, it's as simple as trying to plant the seed of belief in people's minds that had it somehow been you or them and my little rubber-tired sandals of those years in prison, you would have survived for the very same reasons that I did. Because look, there's nothing extraordinary about me, really. With the same training and orientation going in, you could have survived too. And if people believe that, and hopefully I help them to believe it a little bit, then it changes their perspective on all the things that are going on in their own lives at any given time, whether that be, personal or professional setbacks and challenges, or financial difficulties, or physical challenges, that kind of thing. And so the feedback that I've received over the years has convinced me that it's been a productive effort, and for me it's been very gratifying.
How do you hold it all together after being in an experience like that? What was that experience like?
Well, it was very bizarre in some ways, Evan. It was an experience that taught me to be in the moment, certainly to understand, to be present, for example, and to understand that life certainly has its ups and downs and peaks and valleys, and that if you don't experience both, you're not really living life. And through that kind of philosophy, you sort of learn how to embrace even the pain that comes with life, the setbacks and the challenges and the things that you wouldn't sign up for, certainly, but understand that that's just as much a part of life as the joy and the celebration that goes along with it. And with that kind of understanding, it's hard to get down. You stay up and you understand that it doesn't really matter what happens. This is part of life, and that's what I signed up for by being here. And that I look for ways to make a positive experience. I look for the purpose in everything that happens to me. That was one of the most significant things about the experience in Vietnam, I think, was somewhere along the way, probably after a year and a half or so, I realized that there was a purpose to what I was going through, but I didn't know what it was. I just had faith that there was a purpose. And sure enough, when I came home, I began to realize that the speaking that I've been able to do was the fulfillment of my purpose for going through all that in those years as a POW.
How long were you involved in the military before becoming a prisoner of war?
Well, let's see. I joined in 1957 and was shot down in 1966. So about 9 years. I was 32 years old when I was shot down, and 39 when I was repatriated. I was a Navy pilot. I'd flown from aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, and then, of course, in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. And had a fine career going. Made the rank of lieutenant commander a year early, although I hadn't put on the rank literally before I was shot down. But while I was there, I made commander, and it took me a while to answer to Commander Coffee after I got out because it was kind of a foreign concept to me. So my career was sailing around, and gee whiz, I zigged when I should have zagged over in North Vietnam, and I got kind of put on hold. But we all realized that even though we might have been shot down and been captured and became POWs, it didn't change the fact that we were still in combat. We still had a significant duty to uphold.
For those of us who have obviously never been in this type of experience, can you maybe share with us something there that helped you get through that hard time?
One of the most unexpected advantages to that experience, and I use the term advantage, purposely, was a solitary confinement. Believe it or not, there was so much to be gained from being in solitary. And, stop and think about it. When is the last time that you or any of your listeners out there had a chance to just take one day with no radio, television, fax machines, memos, meetings, beepers, iPods, you name it, and get away from it all and just think about yourself and how you got to where you are, or maybe more importantly, how you're going to get to where you want to be. The solitary confinement gave me the opportunity to go back into my life to the very earliest memory I could possibly recall, maybe 3 years old, 4, whatever it was, go back and relive my entire life in minute detail. It took months. And in that process, you really get a handle on yourself. You begin to understand yourself and who you are and why you are the way you are and why you believe and feel the way that you do, what motivates you. It helps you to understand yourself, to be in touch with your humanness, to maybe even forgive yourself for the first time in your life, perhaps. But it never would have been possible without all that time to think, to just think about yourself. And we stayed very busy, and that was only part of it. I mean, we would communicate with each other through the walls by tapping from cell to cell, and we would challenge each other with questions, and we would study foreign languages and sciences and mathematics through the walls. I mean, my audiences usually crack up when I sometimes say, sometimes I go to bed there, and I say bed, but it was really a concrete slab, and I'd say to myself, gee, I didn't get done everything I wanted to do today. And here you are in this prison complex, and people would think, oh my gosh, it must have been so boring Well, it could have been boring if you let it, but we didn't let it get boring. We realized that we had a rare opportunity to experience something that the vast majority of Americans never have a chance to experience. You even rationalize it, well, I guess, if you believe in the code of experience, you should get tortured at least once in your life. That's dark prison humor, but you really begin to think that way.
How are you able to keep such a good attitude? Because, a lot of people might just get captured and then be like, why me? And then kind of be depressed for a while. How did you keep a good attitude, and how long was it that you knew that you could continue and keep going, as you could have the fellowship with the other POWs that were also near you?
It's interesting you use the line, why me? Because certainly that's exactly what it was. You get into prison, and the reality would begin to set in, and you say, wait a minute, this was supposed to happen to the other guy, never to me. Why me? And the real turning point, Kari, came when my prayers, and there were a lot of them, believe me, daily, and spiritual faith was one of the most significant aspects of my survival. But my prayers finally changed from why me, God, to show me, God. Show me what I'm supposed to do with this. What are you preparing me for? What am I supposed to learn from this experience? Help me to use it to go home whenever that might be as a better, stronger, smarter person in every possible way that I can be. To go home as a better naval officer, to go home as a better Christian, to go home as a better American citizen, to go home as a better husband and father and friend to all my friends. Every possible way, help me to use this time productively. And then having realized that there was going to be a purpose to what I was going through, although I didn't know what it was the entire time I was in prison. But just knowing that there was a purpose, that there was something to build toward, and that every day wasn't just a void or a vacuum in my life, a waste of time, that made a huge difference. And that turning point was when I realized that there was going to be a purpose to what I was going through.
How did you know you were going home?
Oh, I never did. But every time I'd go to sleep at night, the last thing I would think is, well, that's one day closer, whenever it is.
When you folks were able to communicate with each other, I guess you had talked about tapping and through code and things like that. Was there ever a time at the beginning where you tried to figure out, how can I escape this? How can I get out? And what can we do together to be stronger, although we're apart?
Well, the communication system we used by tapping on the walls allowed us to be strong. In fact, our little 3-word motto was unity over self, which of course is a team motto or a family motto or a corporate motto. It has infinite application. But to maintain that unity, we knew we had to communicate. And by tapping on the walls, we stayed in touch, and the senior officers who we followed in accordance with our military code of conduct were able to pass out policy and give orders, and we could help each other. We could console one another, encourage one another, pass the time together. So the communicating was especially important. And in fact, it would take up a lot of the time each day. And if you were really isolated, a lot of the thing would take up at the time is trying to figure out how to reach the closest guy to you. Figure out some creative way to communicate with a person, whether that be, write a little note with a burnt matchstick or a piece of red brick and leave it someplace where you're sure there's a pretty good chance the guy might find it, or how to whisper to a guy around a corner or get his attention, or to a line of sight so you could kind of flash your hand using tap code, all kinds of ways. So it was a constant challenge, and your mind was constantly busy. I thought my brain would atrophy from lack of use when I first got there, but then just the opposite took place.
Are you able to give us a little bit of example of what tapping is? For people that are not in the military, we're not really familiar.
It wasn't really a military issue. Most naval aviators, know Morse code with dots and dashes, but that's just rote memory. Our little communication system that we call a tap code, was based upon 25 letters of our alphabet. We throw out the letter K because we use a C interchangeably most of the time. Then we arrange those remaining 25 letters in 5 rows of 5 letters each, one row on top of the other. As you guys are looking at it, for example, it would be A through E in the top row, F through J in the second row, third row, fourth row, fifth row of 5, putting Z in the lower right-hand corner. Between 5 horizontal rows and 5 vertical columns, all in the same little square. A is up in the corner, first row, first column. So when I tap an A on the wall, I tap. Once for the row, once for the column. So A is 1 and 1. B is in the first row, but the second column over. 1 and 2. C, first row, third column. And so on. N is right in the middle, third row, third column. Of course, Z is in the lower right-hand corner, which is fifth row, fifth column. And that's how the system was based. And then we developed all kinds of refinements. And, when the guy who was receiving the message you were sending recognized the word, he would just give you a double tap and it cut off the word and go on the next one. It was amazing how fast we could communicate, almost at a regular conversational pace. Then you could translate those numbers in taps to flashing your hand, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, that kind of thing. And you could, now Admiral Jeremiah Denton, retired, also a U.S. Senator, retired, had the presence of mind to flash with his eyes the word torture when he was being interviewed by an anti-war activist group. So that was the first inclination or indication that our government had that we were being tortured there. But he was using Morse code because in flash, blinking your eyes, you can close your eyes and hold them longer or just a little blink. So he would spell out T-O-R-T-U-R-E, T-O-R-T-U-R-E, by blinking his eyes. An amazing feat. And he's answering questions at the same time, but had, as I say, the presence of mind to be able to communicate that with Morse code at the same time. Amazing.
It's amazing that you guys can communicate through tapping and eyes and things like that. And today, still, people have generally a tough time communicating.
That's one of the things that I emphasize, Evan, as you can imagine. I mean, I talk about communicating in presentations that I give, and that people don't have to tap through the walls in the offices. We sometimes get so wrapped up in our technology that we forget to get up out of our chair, walk around the corner, and get into the office and communicate with another person eye to eye. And with that personal contact, you have more empathy, more understanding, more insight into what's going on in that person's life rather than with an email, for example. Person-to-person communication in business is extremely important. And I think that technology has led us away from that to our detriment.
What advice can you give to maybe business people out there on things that they can improve on in their own communication?
Compassion and understanding, I think, is very important. And communicating in a way, as you can imagine, you're tapping on the walls, your brevity is paramount. And to not get carried away with verbosity and so on. If you have a message or something communicating, you simply say it open and honestly, without worrying about being politically correct, or maybe be sensitive, but you don't hurt a person's feelings necessarily, certainly. But you have to get the message out. The business has to be done, certainly. But communicating briefly, to the point, and face-to-face is the most important. I mean, like I say, we get so caught up in email. Susan and I, sometimes, across the same desk, we work facing each other. Sometimes we'll send an email to each other. Not when they're sitting there, but you know that they'll pick it up later on. But I'm going to see her in 5 minutes, so why not just wait and tell her? But I sent an email. It's crazy.
We sit across from each other, and while we're physically there, we still email each other.
That's right.
So it's a good example.
That's right. It's just one example of how technology has separated us in our humanness. And that's one of the things that a good leader has to be conscious of, is to try to maximize those person-to-person contacts.
So are you able to share with us a little bit about the involvement that you have in the community and some of the organizations that you're involved in?
I'd be glad to, Kari. And one of the reasons that I'm here is that I believe so much in what the two of you are doing for our community and emphasizing the importance of coordination among business people to greater good radio. I mean, it says it all right there. Sometimes we forget about the greater good, quote unquote, because we get so wrapped up in our own little unique Manini business issues. But everybody doesn't have the luxury of doing that, because sometimes business is just darn tough and they don't have time for community involvement, and I recognize that. I'm lucky to have reached a point in my career where I do have more time. I've been the chairman of the Governor's Civil Defense Advisory Council, and I've been active in the City and County of Honolulu Charter Commission as one of the commissioners in the last several months as we winnow through the recommendations for changes to the charter and the changes that will go on the ballot in November, for example. That's been a very challenging but also gratifying endeavor. Very strong advocate of Boy Scouts of America. I don't have very many regrets in my life, but one was that I didn't stay a Boy Scout long enough to make Eagle. I got one rank away, and then I learned about girls, I guess. My interest changed at the wrong time. But I really, really admire the Boy Scouts of America, what they stand for, and the kind of young men and women, in Girl Scouts' case, that they turn out. Really good, solid citizens for our country. I eagerly speak to civic organizations, Rotary, Kiwanis, Elks Clubs, things like that, to help people understand the importance of community involvement. And when I speak, I talk about faith in ourselves, one another, faith in our country, America, and faith in God. And the faith in one another is where we communicate with each other and solve problems together by coming together as a civic organization, where we get involved. And, as an aside, it's good networking for business too. But nevertheless, the primary motivation has to be for the good of the community. And then everything good accrues from that.
Why are you involved with these things, though? Why is it important to you? And then why is it important for you to work with these community organizations in Hawaii?
Well, Hawaii is my home in the first place. I mean, as I just wrote in a column recently, I love Hawaii. I've been here for 32 years, and I live here by choice. I'm kind of on it by choice, so to speak. And, just like when I lived in California, I'm born and raised in California, I call myself a Californian, but now I'm in Hawaii, so I'm a Hawaiian. Not a native Hawaiian, obviously, but I'm of Hawaii now. And so I choose to live here. And I love the community, I love the Aloha spirit, I love the culture, I love the language and the music, and I just wouldn't want to live anywhere else if I could help it. So that's one of the reasons that I try to be active in the community, to help improve wherever I can. I feel a responsibility as well, to the old thing, to much is given, many is requested. That's paraphrase, but if you have the means to give back and to be involved, then I think you should. So, and I'm also, the Civil Defense Advisory Council is very important to me because I take seriously the terrorist threat to our country and to our community, particularly to Honolulu right now. And I fear that too many people still have their heads in the sand. They're in denial about what we really face in our war against Islamo-fascist terrorism. And to make sure that our community is safe and that our readiness level is maintained at a high level, and that people are informed about their needs in a disaster or an emergency situation. I was very gratified that the governor also shares that feeling and just has devoted much of our surplus recently to upgrading the shelters that are necessary, and even going so far as to learning the lesson from Katrina and making space for people's pets in the shelters as well. So it's because I feel so deeply for my community and for Hawaii and for our country, America, and the threats that are posed to both entities through international terrorism, it would make me want to be involved that much more. It's love. It's through love.
When you, I guess, first meet somebody or you meet them on the airplane as you were mentioning, and then you say that you were a POW, what are people's reactions to that?
Silence at first, and I know what they're thinking. And then usually the next question is, how long were you a POW? I say 7 years. Oh, wow. And then there's silence again. And they say, well, when you speak, do you talk about that experience or something like that? And that starts the conversation, and people express just natural human curiosity. And actually, it's that expression of natural human curiosity that motivated me to speak in the first place, because I realized that I could capitalize on that curiosity to say things that I felt needed to be said in our country, especially back in the early 70s when I first came back. And I thought there'd be a shelf life to what I do, but it just keeps on going. And now with our war against terror, and after 9/11, a lot of speakers took a hit. I mean, because a lot of people canceled their meetings, people didn't want to fly, and some speakers got canceled out and a long time before they got any more engagements. In my case, there was hardly a blip on my own speaking calendar, because 9/11 caused people to have this kind of underlying subconscious feeling of being ill at ease, of concern, and a little low level of fear as well, based upon the uncertainty of the future. And what I try to do is help people understand that it doesn't matter what happens in the future. We have the capability as individuals, that's in every one of us, to handle whatever comes down the pike, and to look at every single opportunity as a way to learn a lesson and to be better, and to understand the importance of working together and to giving each other the benefit of the doubt until it's proven that it's not appropriate, to understand what our country really stands for, and to keep faith in our country, in America, and learn about our history and the foundations upon which it's founded. About our military, when I first started speaking, I spoke in uniform, and I got as much positive feedback just from the uniform as I did for what I said in many cases. But to understand what our military is about, and to understand that all professional military officers aren't all hawks. And I measure my success as a naval officer by every day that our country's at peace. A young reporter once said, well, you must want to kind of be eager for us to get back in combat, because that's the only way that the Defense Department can get bigger budgets and you can get more medals. But he couldn't be more wrong. If I'm doing my job right, we'll maintain peace through strength. I don't look forward to war. No warrior does. No good warrior does. But you look forward to being prepared if necessary.
How did you end up in Hawaii?
When I first returned from Vietnam, my first tour was 2 years at the University of California, Berkeley, in a master's program in political science. As I say in audiences, I figured if I could survive 7 years in a communist prison, I could have 2 years at Berkeley. And it's a big laugh, of course. Most people know about Berkeley being so liberal, and it was good for me. I mean, I learned while I was at Berkeley during those 2 years what I was supposed to learn, but also about what life had been like back here in America all those years, and it helped me to slough off some of that hard defensive shell that I had to build up during all those years. So after those 2 years in Berkeley, it came time to put on my dream sheet where I wanted to go, and I looked at alternatives, and I was eligible for Squadron Command. And there was a squadron at the Naval Air Station Barbers Point here in Hawaii that I was eligible to command, A4 Skyhawk Squadron. And so I put in for that, and I got it. So my family and I came out here, and we lived in quarters at Barbers Point for those 2 years while I had that command. And then I went back to Washington, D.C. for a 10-month school tour at the National Defense University. And I went back there, left my family in quarters at Barbers Point because we all went. My next door was the beat of the Pentagon. So I came back here and then got a job on the staff at the Commander-in-Chief Pacific Fleet as the Fleet Air Operations Officer. Continued to live in quarters at Barbers Point. And then my last tour was a 3-year tour as a public affairs officer, and I was just speaking full-time, mostly to military units, ships and squadrons and battalions and so on, staffs, that kind of thing, as a part of their military training.
How did the speaking come into play? When did you get your first speaking engagement? When did you know you wanted to speak? How'd that come about?
You know, the very first speech I gave wasn't really a speech. It was when I first came home and rejoined my family, and they had stayed in a little small town on the East Coast near Orlando, a place called Sanford, Florida. And my wife and kids had been there the whole time. Even though we were from California, she never knew when I was going to come home, and her life was in a holding pattern all those years. So when I came home, and we went to church together that first Sunday morning home in a little parish that they'd been attending all that time, and the priest, afterwards they held a welcome home reception for me in the parish hall, and the priest stood up and gave some very gracious words of welcome home, and it was appropriate for me to respond. And the things that I said extemporaneously in that response, i.e. things like how I felt the thoughts and prayers of everybody that was praying for me all those years, and they really helped, they really made a difference, and how I had kept faith in myself to do it, and faith in the people around me, and especially to my family. Half the world away, my youngest son was born after I was shot down, so we didn't meet till he was 7. But keeping faith in them to keep my image alive all those years in prison, and the importance of the spiritual faith upon which every other kind of faith was founded. So the things that I said that morning in response kind of became the seeds of what I've been saying over the years in my platform presentation as a keynote speaker. Faith in ourselves, faith in each other, faith in America, and faith in God. How it worked for me in the prison environment, more importantly, how it works for us right here at home every day in our families and our jobs and our communities. So that's how it all got started.
I wanted to go back a little bit to your childhood because you said that you were born and raised in California. What were your dreams as a really young child? What did you want to do?
I had no idea that I'd ever be in the military, that I would ever pursue a military career. I mean, you know, we just evolved. Very few of it. And in UCLA, I was an art major. And very few of us end up in the profession that we study for in college. And I admire people who do. And, you know, doctors and lawyers probably do so more than anybody else. But when I got my diploma from UCLA in 1957, I also got my draft notice. And so I looked around at some alternatives, and naval aviation looked exciting. I liked the looks of the beaches of Pensacola, Florida, where the training took place, so I went Naval Air. Never understanding that I was making a 28-year career decision when I went to Pensacola, Florida, to learn how to fly Navy airplanes. So that was my entree to the Navy in the first place. And growing up in California, I mean, I just had an idyllic youth as a kid. I mean, my grandfather had a ranch. We raised peaches and other kinds of fruit and animals. And I'd spend every summer on that ranch. And I'm lucky to know all 4 of my grandparents, which I've learned since then is very rare. That's why I want to be the best grandfather that I can be to my grandkids. I have 7. And so that motivates me to cut back on the speaking and to spend more time with grandchildren as well.
How'd you know it was time to retire from the military?
Because I had taken myself out of competition to be an admiral, for example, because all the squares you have to check off to make flag rank would have required more sea duty. And I've been away from my family so much I didn't want to go back to sea and be an aircraft carrier commander, for example, or an air group commander, or a fleet commander, all those things that would be necessary to make admiral. So I decided that after 28 years, I was enjoying the speaking, and there was potential to do it as a civilian. So rather than stay just for 2 more years, which is a normal 30-year career, I decided to get out and go ahead and pursue speaking full-time.
At what point in your lifetime where you've had so much strength in yourself? I mean, you talked about having faith, and when you're captured first, you're kind of asking God, why me? But you seem to have had strength throughout your lifetime where, you know, it led you to making certain decisions.
Susan and I sometimes laugh because we look around and we read things in the newspapers and we watch television, is that we look at each other and say, we must be the only people we know that didn't have dysfunctional family lives. We both had very, very normal family lives, and our parents were very supportive. My parents were very supportive of everything I tried to do. I was active in student government in high school. I was active in athletics. I played football and swam on the swim team. In college, I was on the competitive ski team out of UCLA and played water polo in junior college. And all these team sports, for example, I think really taught me a lot about leadership and teamwork, obviously, but the concept of being there for each other, being in the right place for the other person. Like Wayne Gretzky says, be where the puck is going to be. Well, in team sports, you learn that kind of thing, and you support your teammates by being in the right place when you're supposed to be. So I went into the Navy with that kind of a very functional background, which revolved from a lot of love from my parents. And I recognize that everybody doesn't have that advantage, certainly. But there are ways to make up for that by understanding what you might have lacked in your childhood and how to make up for it as an adult, or as a young adult in particular, ideally. So luck is one thing, Kari, that enabled me to kind of go into the Navy with a strong sense of self-esteem and capability and faith in myself.
Would you consider yourself lucky?
Yeah, I would, and I don't discount luck at all. I'm very, very fortunate. One of my favorite commentators on contemporary society is Dennis Prager. You may have heard of him. He has a radio show every night, and he's an author, and he and I have spoken on the same platform on some occasions. And Dennis wrote a book that says happiness is a serious problem. And by that he means, and the crux of that is, that happiness is directly proportional to gratitude. That makes me the happiest guy I know, because I have so much for which to be grateful. And I think a grateful attitude is also consistent with an attitude of abundance. I mean, it's the glass half empty, half full thing. I always look at things with the glass half full rather than half empty. And people call me an inveterate optimist, and maybe I am, but if I were a total optimist, I wouldn't be concerned about a lot of the things that go on in our society that I want to step in and change or keep from happening. So it's an ability to appreciate every moment, to not try to avoid life, whether it's the good part of life or the painful part of life. It's all part of life, and I don't wish adversity on anybody, but I kind of feel sorry for anybody that can bop through life without any adversity or pain or challenges or tears. It's all part and parcel of our life, and we need to embrace it and understand that if we're going to be a whole person, we have to experience that.
What would you say in your entire life has been your greatest challenge? And then how did you overcome that, and what did you learn from it?
Well, I think honestly that the POW experience was the greatest challenge. To be able to stay focused for 7 years, to keep faith for 7 years, to stay close to my greatest source of strength, my God. The first two English words that I saw scratched on the wall of a cell by another American who had been there before me were simply two words with an equal sign between them. That little formula said, God equals strength. And for me, that really worked. I mean, I was never, ever totally alone. And I could always find a little bit more strength when I needed it. So that was probably the primary key to my survival of that most challenging experience of my life. A lot of things have been challenged about. A lot of, being a good parent consistently is a very challenging thing. And I don't discount how hard that is for people nowadays in particular. And it was easier for lots of reasons when I was the parent. But, you learn how to have faith in your kids, and that all the stuff you try to pound into them, all the good values that you try to teach them all those years will someday catch on. Because if you lose faith, you'll stop, you'll quit. And that's probably the worst time to quit. If you keep faith that those things you're trying to teach your kids are going to someday catch on, and when they get to be 22 or 23 years old, say, wow, where'd this kid come from? And to assure parents that I go out to eat, you see the typical young family, and the kids are screaming, and they're throwing toast on the floor, and the parents can't eat. I tell them, I say, hey, don't worry, the best part is when they get old enough to be your friend. And it'll happen, inevitably. Keeping faith in your children. Keeping faith even when you don't have all the answers. It doesn't freeze you to inaction or to quit being a parent, for example. You simply do the best that you can with the information available. You just never give up. Parenting is very challenging nowadays in particular.
So speaking about parenting, what do you think are 3 to 5 most important things to teach your children? Because you talked about values also.
I've narrowed it down to one, Kari. People are asked, what do you hope for your children to be? Well, let's say successful or financially secure or happy. But you very seldom hear anybody say, I want my kids to be good. I want to teach them to be good people. Okay, what's good? You teach your children to respect. You teach your children compassion for animals and people. You teach your children to have good priorities and to understand a sense of proportionality. You teach your children to understand what's appropriate for any given time or circumstance, whether that comes to what they wear, a sense of proportionality, a sense of propriety, I guess is the word that I'm looking for. All those things go into teaching a child to be good. And I think it's very important to teach a child spiritual values as well. And that's one area that gets very short shrift, I fear, in our society too often today. Spiritual values, thrift, which falls under the bit about proportionality, compassion, like I said, compassion, respect, starting with self-respect. A young girl, she's about 14 years old, used to be our neighbor. She's in Oklahoma now. I just wrote an email that her mother wrote, and they were out here visiting, and she just became one of the student athletes of her high school. She got straight A's, and she plays on 3 varsity teams. I wrote an email to congratulate her, especially for a young girl, to understand the importance of translating that success into self-esteem, and that she doesn't have to answer to anybody. I mean, within reason, her mother, of course, but I mean, don't accept anybody beating her down or denigrating her or to belittle her for any reason at all. Don't accept anybody treating her with the utmost respect, and to be totally impatient with anything else, to help her maintain her self-esteem. She doesn't have a father. Her father died of cancer when she was just a little baby.
What would you say is your greatest life accomplishment?
I think raising my 4 children, and to see what they've become, and to see them raising their children in a similar way. Maybe the single most gratifying thing in my life.
Lastly, in closing off, maybe you can share with us something inspirational for our listeners out there. Everyone thinks they go through hard times, but there's always something to take them through it. Maybe you can share a personal thing.
One of the things that always inspired me there in the prison environment was the way that we try to take good care of each other. And when the man in the cell next to you was down and hurting, being punished, whatever the reason, maybe his ankles were locked in the ankle stocks at the foot of his concrete slab and his hands were manacled behind him, like that for 4 or 5 weeks, you'd get up to your wall frequently and you'd tap to him, which is GB, and that means God bless. And he knew that that also meant, be tough, babe, hang in there. I love you, and I'm praying for you. And you bet you were. And then each night when things would quiet down, when we'd go to sleep, you'd tap to the guy in the next cell. GN, good night. God bless you. GBA, God bless America, every single night. That kind of trust and faith and care in one another.
If there's one message that you can leave with our audience today from this entire conversation, what would that message be?
Be in the moment. Be there with what's happening now. Don't be so preoccupied with what's going to happen tomorrow or fretting so much about what happened yesterday that you miss the importance of what's going on right now. Simply be in the moment.
Thank you so much, Captain Jerry Coffey, for joining us, and we hope to have you back again soon.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for what you're doing.
If you resonate with Greater Good Radio, please join our community at www.greatergoodradio.com, where you can get access to exclusive content and offerings. Hope to see you soon.